side, 2. 2, 2, 2. Right side, 2. Check. Okay.
Mic test 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2.
2, 2, 2.
1, 2. 1, 2. Mic test 1, 2.
2, 2, 2. Testing. 2, 2, 2. Testing 2.
Oh, the light on my face. It's making me get hot flushes. No. Yeah, but now I'll be all sweaty.
You can ask Avela maybe to get the technician to come in the light. But it'll be dark, so I think people will struggle to see you online.
Especially when I'm also dark.
Is it really a problem?
No, it's okay. I'll handle it, yeah. Just need some water.
This one challenge is that the presenters will not be able to see.
That's the thing.
So
Okay, maybe I'll call someone up, they come in, talk, and then they go back to,
you think that's the best way?
yeah. Maybe that will work best because we won't be able to see what's happening on the screen.
Yeah, it will be difficult. She was suggesting that maybe
Yes, lights on. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I think we are going to start. Can we settle down? Those who need to be seated, can they be seated? We don't have a lot of time. As you know, we have our very first session is on the CRVS at 9 o'clock. So distinguished delegates and colleagues and friends, good morning. It's a great pleasure to welcome you this morning. Oli, can you sit down? Thank you. And as you know, we are having this event on the margins of the 9th Global Forum on Gender Statistics here in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I would also like to welcome all our participants who are online. My name is Yandi Swa Mbechene. I'm a Deputy Director General at Stats SA and the Program Director for today. Our focus today is on strengthened marriage registration as a tool for gender equality and women's empowerment. And this side event is co-hosted by Statistics South Africa, the UNFPA, and its Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems, and the UN Legal Identity Agenda Task Force. So we don't have a lot of time. I'll just go into just one snippet of what we need to know about today. That gender-responsive CRVS systems are a critical tool for rights, inclusion, opportunity, and prosperity. Marriage and divorce registration are often neglected components of civil registration, vital statistics, and legal identity systems. You are going to hear more about this topic from our distinguished panelists, not from me. My job today is just to be a program director. So I am pleased to invite Ms. Chinwe Ogbona, Deputy Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, UNFPA, to provide some opening remarks and to get us started and set the scene. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I think you can hear me. And good morning, and bring you warm greetings from the UNFPA East and Southern Africa Regional Office, based here in Johannesburg. And joining the government of South Africa, I'm sure to welcome you again. I know you're going to the third day of the forum, and as you round up again, I know that I trust you've had good deliberations, constructive conversations, and forward-looking recommendations are emerging. It is a great pleasure for UNFPA, and I have here our colleagues from our headquarters, the Chief of our Population Development Branch, that hosts this body of work that collaborates on the forum. It is our pleasure to be co-hosting this side event on the sidelines of the 9th Global Forum on Gender Statistics to discuss this morning how to further strengthen marriage registration as a tool for gender equality and women's empowerment. Routine vital statistics on marriage and divorce are crucial tools, like my sister said here, and how much so because we are less than 7 years to the SDG timeline. So the clock is ticking and there is urgency to be able to do all that we can. Marriage registration data provides an evidence base for us to assess progress towards the elimination of harmful practices such as child marriage, which in itself provides insight on gender dimensions on important life transitions, particularly for young women and adolescent girls. And we know that the population, we marked 8 billion last year in November, and we know that the population that is accounted for by women and young people is almost half, and in some countries more than half of their population. So a population that we cannot afford to look away from. For adolescents and young people, in some countries they're about 20%. Again, a critical population that we cannot afford to look away from. So the issues of child marriage, early and forced marriage, being able to track it through this for us is very important. We are glad that on the African continent, recommendations from the 5th and 6th African Conference on Ministers responsible for civil registration, the 5th one was held in Lusaka in 2019, the 6th one in Addis Ababa in 2022 last year. They all recognized this and urged countries to improve the registration of marriages and divorces as tools to monitor progress towards achieving the SDGs, especially SDG 5. And we also know that the SDG 11 is about reducing inequalities, and by itself, the gender inequalities is a critical part of it. We acknowledge the major investments that have been made in strengthening civil registration and vital statistics across the world, and also here in East and Southern Africa. But I'm guessing that through the forum, you've heard of all the gaps and all the unfinished business that needs to be closed. And we do know that in this case, marriage and divorce registration systems remain incomplete and deficient in the areas of data quality, in the areas of timeliness of registration of the vital events, so delays between when the event happens and then when the registration happens, and then the scale of dissemination of the analytical evidence that is emerging from those, to mention a few. We also know that the registration systems remain inaccessible in a lot of the countries by their setup, by their structures, by their geographic locations, and these make it inaccessible to many women and young girls, and also in underserved communities. So again, a critical area that needs to be paid attention to. So the UNFPA Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems is committed to supporting knowledge exchange and technical collaborations to ensure that CRVS as systems are strengthened to serve as a powerful tool for women's rights and gender equality. For us in UNFPA, we say rights and choices for all. This is why we are pleased to be co-hosting this side event with Statistics South Africa, which is one of the leading national statistical offices that continues to demonstrate the power of routine production, analysis, and dissemination of vital statistics on marriage and divorces. We also acknowledge the use of evidence and data emerging from the national CRVS in South Africa and how they use that for decision making. So we applaud Stats SA, and we truly appreciate the partnership that we have with you, and we look forward to strengthening that. In East and Southern Africa region, and indeed across Africa, UNFPA is partnering through the African Program on Accelerated Improvement of CRVS, known as API CRVS. And in this, we partner with UNECA, WHO, UNICEF, World Bank, and some other non-UN entities like Vital Strategies, Plan International, Africa CDC, to mention a few. We look forward to sustaining this collaboration and to ensure that women and girls are equal before the law, from birth to death, including all the important life transitions in between. So as I conclude, I will be sitting there at the back, and I don't know that much about CRVS, but I do know that it's important for us to make sure that everybody is counted, and for that to happen, we need to count everybody. So I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to ensuring that the conversations today will make recommendations that will mobilize smarter investments and stronger technical innovations in marriages and divorce registration. One of the areas that in this region, East and Southern Africa, and I know my sister that you will agree, innovation and digital technology is critical if we're going to close this gap. So again, looking forward to the conversations, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chinwe, for such insightful opening remarks and for setting the scene for us. So as you go down, I'll introduce our panel, the first panelist for the day. Our first panelist is Dr. Romesh Silva, sitting there at the end of the table. He's a technical specialist at the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems at UNFPA headquarters in New York. And Romesh will share with us an overview of the state of marriage and divorce registration in terms of international standards, common practices, available data, and published statistics. Over to you, Romesh.
Well, thank you so much, Yandiswa, and very good morning to everybody. As Yandiswa said, I'll give a brief overview of really where are we and where to from here in terms of marriage and divorce registration and vital statistics on nuptiality. For us at the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems at UNFPA, this is a critical and unfortunately an understudied area of civil registration and legal identity. But it's one of critical importance in terms of having a holistic and a life course approach to universal civil registration and legal identity. ensuring that all births and deaths are registered, including all the critical vital events, including marriage and divorce in between. Such a life course approach helps us to really ensure that the registration of vital events guide our understanding of key things like child marriage, women's empowerment, gender equality, preventable maternal deaths, and all of these, key areas of focus. And civil registration is also a key and the preferred source of vital statistics. But one thing to recognize is that in terms of marriage registration, our evidence base and really what we know is much less and a lot spottier than our evidence base when it comes to birth and death registration. Here I'm showing you from the 2010 census round the 6 countries which included questions on marriage registration, completeness and quality in their census. And here you can see that even the way that the assessment of marriage registration is undertaken in something like a population and housing census varies. Here you can see that the age eligibility criteria for assessing marriage registration varies from looking at people from 15 years and above, for example in Armenia, to 12 years and above in countries like Costa Rica, Cuba, and Ghana. But further, in the fourth column from the left, it's interesting to note that national statistics offices and governments, even have a different view in terms of what types of marriage are actually considered a marital union by the state. And so, for example, in Armenia, the assessment really looks at both civil and religious marriages, but however, the actual civil code in Armenia recognizes civil marriages only, whereas, for example, in Costa Rica, the marriage types which are documented and assessed in the census vary from civil, religious, and cohabitation, and the marriage code itself recognizes civil and religious. And so there's key conceptual and definitional issues to really unpack here. And then in terms of what do we understand, well, for us at UNFPA is, a major supporter of the decennial census rounds. We see census as a critical tool to assess marriage registration completeness. Here you can see, across Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and a number of these countries, the colored vertical lines here are showing you for each country the national marriage registration completeness percentage. So from around 23% in Senegal to almost universal completeness in Kyrgyzstan and Armenia. But the dots here tell a profound picture here. For example, in Brazil, despite registration completeness being around 60%, across the country it varies from as low as about 28% up to about 17%. It's a massive subnational variation, which these kinds of systematic assessments can help us understand. But further, not only understanding how complete and who's in the picture in terms of marriage registration is a critical piece, but what are the structural determinants or impediments of marriage registration? At the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems, we've recently carried out a multi-country study in Benin, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Republic of Congo, Jordan, and Morocco, really studying these factors. And what we've really learned is that the key factors, we can think of them in terms of socioeconomic and cultural factors, which really affect the decision whether or not to register a marriage. And then, access issues, which Chinwe already talked about, and then even the quality of marriage and divorce registration services. Just to kind of share with you, some key findings here. One of the big pieces from this research that we've found is that in many countries, particularly here in sub-Saharan Africa, the sort of primacy of the importance of religious ritual and community recognition is often prioritized much more than the actual civic registration of a marriage or a divorce even by the civil registration and legal identity authorities. And here you can see some quotes from some of the qualitative interviews and focus groups where people, clearly identify the secondary importance in their lives in terms of marriage registration by the state. And so key issues here to try to unpack in terms of making marriage registration relevant for people from all walks of life and in all corners of the globe, and accessible. We're here gathered on the sidelines of the 9th Global Forum on Gender Statistics. And one thing to note is that although marriage registration in particular is under-resourced relative to birth and death registration, this colored table that I'm showing really is highlighting the data items which traverse both spousal attributes and actual conditions around the marriage event in terms of time, location, and things like that. And what we can see here is that many countries, in terms of their marriage registration forms and their marriage registration systems, are collecting all the recommended data items. The areas which are perhaps need a bit more effort and focus are really some of the spousal attributes like occupation, educational level, and prior marital status. But things, in terms of the basic system design looks okay. But in terms of the availability of data, here I'm showing you what this looks like in Eastern, Southern, and Western Central Africa. And, these dark purple lines are showing you what does marriage registration availability look like, across this part of the continent over the last decade or so. And it's humbling. Here we see, in Eastern and Southern Africa, just 4 countries which, are really consistently, producing and publishing marriage registration. And our host, Statistics South Africa, has been a world leader here. I think what's heartening to say is that when national statistical systems collect and disseminate this, they do it pretty consistently, as you can see from these lines traversing across the entire page. When we look across the world, and here I'm showing countries from all 6 regions of the world, we can see that there are 4 minimum tabulations in terms of marriage statistics and 7 in terms of divorce statistics. As was already mentioned, South Africa does a really great job of producing 3 out of the required marriage tabulations and 6 out of the 7 in terms of divorce. But many countries are struggle to produce these minimum tabulations. So a lot more support needed here. But let me end on really recognizing that there are some notable good practices in terms of nuptiality vital statistics which we can build on. Let me really highlight work in Mexico where there's annual publication of marriage and divorce statistics based on vital registration, and for persons as young as 12 years old, and for marriage types not only between males and females, but also same-sex marriages. In the Philippines and South Africa, similarly, annual vital statistics on nuptiality with disaggregation by the type of marital union, customary, civil, religious, even tribal marriages. So really engaging the diversity of marital union here. And then in Jordan, really want to highlight that, the Jordanian Statistical Office, is doing a really wonderful job of documenting and disaggregating this data by educational attainment and occupation status. And so, just to conclude, to say that, the marriage and divorce registration are absolutely critical for, empowering women and ensuring gender equality as people transition into marriage, while they're in marriage, and if and when they decide to leave a marriage. And I think we need to remind ourselves and call into question, our levels of commitment here in terms of advancing universal legal identity, and reminding ourselves of the importance of marriage and divorce registration. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Ramesh, for such brief but concise observations of what's happening with this topic. You have outlined for us where we are, what we still need to do, what the challenges are. So with that, I'm going to move to country case studies to learn about what countries are doing with marriage and divorce registration. Is Charles here? Not yet? If not, then we'll go to Ms. Widi Sari. She's going to talk to us about Puskapa, Indonesia, the recent work that they're doing there. This is a research institute at the University of Indonesia, and Ms. Widi Sari will share insights from a landmark 7-year study into the legal identity system in Indonesia, with a focus on how marriage and divorce registration have been evaluated in Indonesia. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So today I'll present to you our lessons learned from a 7-year civil registration and legal identity program in Indonesia, especially in 26 districts. So Puskapa, or the Center of Child Protection and Wellbeing at University of Indonesia, where I work in collaboration with COMPAC, so an Australia-Indonesia partnership facility, and the Ministry of National Development Planning. So we initiated a program in 2015 to improve legal identity and civil registration in Indonesia. And this program was supported by the Australian government and was completed in 2021. Okay, so before the program was implemented, so the people, the Indonesian citizens in the areas that we work with were unregistered, and their life events has not been recorded. And our initial studies revealed that a lot of children actually live without birth certificates. Many residents live without identity cards, and married couples, a lot of married couples doesn't have marriage certificates. So we also found that civil registration data was outdated and incomplete at that time. Therefore, this program was initiated to achieve this goal. So here's the theory of change. So essentially, oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. So essentially, the program wants to get to support the civil registration services, so it become easier, affordable, and closer to the people, as well as it want to help the data integration, especially at the village level. So hopefully all citizens, it's our broader goal, can be recorded without exception. And this goal were achieved, or these main activities that we did in the program. So first, we support to strengthen the policies, the system, and procedures in the district areas that we were working in. So we also increase the awareness on gender and social identity, especially for civil registration officers and local people who work around it, and maintain the social accountability and strengthen the public budget management. So we also work with the local government, especially in the budget division and development planning at the local level, to improve the budget allocation for civil registration services. And last, we also support to improve the village information system so they can have more complete and integrated data at the village level. So hopefully all of these will connect data and make civil registration services become closer and easier to access for the people. So in 2019, Puskapa conducted an assessment in 10 selected districts out of 26 to inform program improvements. And then in 2021, we also conducted a telephone survey of 1,040 households that we surveyed in 2019 to gain insight into changes and legal identity document ownership and life cycle among the households. So we select this area to cover diversity of socio-economic characteristics, local policy structure, geography, and maximizing potential for knowledge production. So this is Indonesian map. Oh, sorry, yeah. So this is the Indonesian map. And yeah, these are the 26 of districts that we were working through this program, and we conducted the assessment in 10 of the districts. And here with the box is our assessment areas. Okay, so this is the just brief characteristics of the household that we surveyed. I'm sorry, it's not clear but basically it's just like how many, the percentage of female and male who live in urban and rural, and we see that most of our program residents live in the rural area, and it's actually, we did it purposefully because at the time our consideration is we want to get more people who live in rural area and poor, so we can help them better in accessing civil registration services. So here, what we found, actually, there is a positive change from 2019 to 2021 in terms of the ownership of excuse me, civil registration, legal identity documents. For example, 75 of infants that born between 29 and 2021 have already a birth certificate, and the new marriages that happen between 2019 and 2021 already have a marriage certificate. But we see that in the case of death, it's still lower, so the ownership of death notification letter and the death certificate is pretty low, and this is also something that Indonesia is still need to work more as well. Okay, so this one we also, from the 2019, we also revisit those who didn't have like legal identity documents, either birth certificate or national ID, or couples who didn't have marriage certificates. And in 2021, we saw that actually 93% of the children who didn't have birth certificate previously in 2021, they finally had. Thank you. And 70% of respondents who previously didn't have an ID. In 2021, they finally did have. And, but for marriage registration, so those who didn't have marriage certificate, only 32% finally got marriage certificates in 2021. Okay, so this is the percentage of marriage certificate ownership. We saw that a slightly increase in the overall marriage certificate ownership. So in 2019, it's overall 84%, and then it increased to 88% in 2001. But overall, there is not much different. And also from the bottom side is the district. So we also look at like there's a slight increase between 2019 to 2021. So we also asked the households during the survey who has taken care of their legal identity documents in the last 2 years. So whether they actually obtain it by themselves or they have someone that helped them in getting the legal documents. So for example, the birth certificate, most of respondents' household actually get them by themselves, as well as ID and also the marriage certificate. But then the second higher percentage is they were assisted by village officer for all of them, but for birth certificate mostly they were assisted by friend, relative, but for ID and marriage certificates they actually asking help for local civil registration facilitator. This local civil registration facilitator is a person at usually at the village level that actually paid by the village or the local district to help the people who need support in accessing the legal identity documents. So so among those who don't have legal identity documents, for birth certificate and marriage certificates, we found that highest percentage is among the poorest, but we don't have any differences for those who didn't have ID. Okay, so and when we asked our respondents why you don't have a legal identity documents, why you don't have birth certificate, ID, and marriage registration. So for birth certificate and ID, mostly they have because they don't have time to get the IDs because they need to work. But for marriage registration, most of them think that it's not important. And I think this is also interesting why the reason people don't have different legal identity documents. Okay, so this is like the discussion that we had. We just look at a little bit about a marriage registration from this study and our assessment in this 10 district. But we found that the fact that many of those who did not have marriage certificate in 2019 still do not have one in 2021 may indicate the problem of marriage registration is more complex than birth or ID registration. So this is some of something that we still need to explore more around marriage registration in Indonesia, but a lack of incentives for citizens to register their marriages maybe contribute to low registration rate. This is shown by their perceived value of marriage certificate itself that they didn't think it's important. Another thing is in Indonesia, there's probably a contribution of the complexity of existing procedures for legalizing and registering marriages, especially for religious minority. And the last also, the complexity comes from the separation of agency authorized to legalize and register marriages. Because like in Indonesia, most of the marriages is legalized by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, because it's a religious part of the Religious Affairs Authority. But to register and to record the marriage is like under the civil registration, which is under the Home Affairs. So this is also might be part of the complexity. Okay. So that's what I can share with you, and hopefully I can learn from other countries as well, and we can discuss how to better improve this system, especially for marriage registration that is still understudied in Indonesia as well. So thank you very much, and you can contact us through this social. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Widi, for those insights. I think it's important for us to know why people don't register. All these events, now you have these insights, then you can have what kind of solutions should you put in place to encourage this registration. So we thank you very much for this. We hope to hear more about the study that you're doing. I will now switch continents, go to Africa. I now have Mr. Charles Nsimbi from Uganda. He's the manager of the Marriage Registration Unit of the Uganda Registration Services Bureau. He's going to provide us insights on the plurality and complexity of marital unions in Uganda and the enabling legal, policy, and technical environment that the government of Uganda has been developing to ensure universal marriage and divorce registration. Mr. Nsimbi, over to you.
Thank you, Dele. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Uganda. I'm finding Johannesburg a little bit chilly. I live at the equator. We don't have winter, we don't have summer, we just have the sun all year round. So yeah, I'm responsible for my being a few minutes late. But here I am, and please forgive me for being late. My name is Charles Nsimbi Kabugujo from Uganda. How do I move this thing? You know?
Great.
Ah, great. These things are not exactly available so much in my place, but well, I will use it. I will learn. Okay, first, Uganda seems to have a very good legal regime for marriage registration. The regime comprises of several laws we're going to see. But what is important to note here is that if you look carefully, you see that 48.2% of the population in Uganda is under 14, okay? That means that literally half the population in Uganda is under 14. Actually, when you go to, if you push it to 1920, you'll find that you are into 70% of the population. And well, marriages and 14-year-olds shouldn't be an issue we should be discussing. Unfortunately, it's an issue we should be discussing. So that's the statistics. Another interesting thing, Uganda, I've been hearing from my colleague here, we have a lot of religions. We have a very official religion, and marriage largely is a religious event. However, again, like Indonesia, marriage is registered by the government under civil registration, which is under Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. So there's a dichotomy there. We have all these religions have their marriage rights, and we have to accommodate them in the laws. And fortunately, we have laws for all of them, but while we have the laws, the Christian law, for instance, the one which governs Christian marriages, it was a 1904 Act. It was a colonial enactment, how they call them, ordinances or something, which were in 62 when we got independence. It was ratified by the parliament and became the law. So we're operating with the law of 1904, which has no regulations at the moment, you can imagine. Okay. Oh, how did this thing?
Oh, this,
Okay.
you have to.
Okay, so you
I have to first move this fast. Ah, okay. Then I go.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Thanks. I'll learn. By the time I'm through, I'll be
An
perfect. Yes. So the most important thing here for us is to define marriage. What is marriage? And if you consider those, what I've mentioned, the very many different religions, they define marriage differently. The Christians are saying man and woman, and whatever. The Muslims are saying you can have four. Customary marriage, which is the tradition which was found there, says unlimited number of spouses. Well, no, the women. You cannot have unlimited number of men, but unlimited number of women. So we have to accommodate all that in the legal regime. And it can be quite interesting because as a Christian, I married one wife 20 years ago, and I'm thinking perhaps I should become a Muslim and pick up a few more, but well, the law does not allow that. So yes, we define marriage, first of all, religiously, customarily, and then we get... What's important is our constitution, the legal regime, put a bar and said that adult age is at 18. And therefore, despite the Muslim Sharia law saying you can marry 14, we have now to insist that Muslim marriages have to conform with the constitution, and so the people have to be over 18, 18 and above. Of course, that means we have a little bit of a clash between faith and the law, which we have to manage. And for us in Uganda, marriage is between a man and a woman. And what is important here is that staying together does not constitute a marriage, or having children does not constitute a marriage. I'm sure in the later sessions we shall have a chat about that, because most of the so-called child marriages, they can't be child marriages because they are not legal, but well, child unions of people who have not done whatever, who have not followed any of these constitutional and legal provisions, and therefore if we have to look at them, we have to devise other ways of reaching that. Okay, this is the legal framework. You can see 1998 is the latest of all these laws, and it is, oh, again, sorry.
Yeah.
1998 is the one which governs my organization, URSB, but all the other laws, the customary one is 74, Mohammedan is 1906, Hindu 1908, then maybe Local Government Act, which governs the registration of whatever, is 97. Okay, so what is our role as the government, as URSB, in registration of marriages and where we can have interventions? Well, first, we're responsible, we're responsible for solemnizing civil marriages for the Kampala, for the capital city. So if we're in South Africa, we would be responsible for civil marriages in Joburg. So in Kampala, we are responsible for all the civil marriages. And then we maintain all the registers of marriages. But that means the marriage must have been legal, which means on our registers, we do not have child marriages because they are not legal. And we would have to find a way of getting to them. We maintain the Muslim and Hindu, and also we license the churches to wed. The churches have to get a license, just like a school gets a license to be able to give exams. The churches have to get a license from government for them to wed. Well, quite a few of them ignore that and wed anyway, which is another challenge which we have to address as we get into this. We also issue the marital status letters. Now the world is a global village. There are hundreds of thousands of Ugandans out of the country, and before they get married anywhere, please ensure that they are not married back in Uganda. Because if you don't get a single status letter, you're going to wed someone. We have had a challenge with the US actually. In the US, people do get married because I think there's a federal arrangement or something. They get married, and then they ask for the marital status letter after, when they're trying to register the marriage. But it's important that you find out that the person is not married in Uganda before you consider solemnizing, whether you're a church or whatever it is. And then, of course, we charge fees. That's a good one. That's what pays my salary. I think it should have been the first one. Okay. Yeah, I've learned. Okay, so the types of marriages I mentioned, the customary Muslim, church, Hindu, and civil marriages. There is a beautiful Mugamba. That's one of the customary marriage things. When you go to pick up the lady, after paying hundreds of cows, they are so generous that they give you milk in those gourds. And you move away, so you have a wife and a whole assembly of milk gourds for you to take milk. This is from one of our nationalities where they are cow people, they are pastoralists, and they do quite take a lot of whatever about milk. I don't take milk. I'm not a pastoralist. Sorry. Okay. So eligibility criteria, what we talked about. Person must be 18. The marriage must be in Uganda. We are not eligible to solemnize marriages or register marriages outside the country. And there's this interesting one, prohibited degrees of what they call, the lawyer said, consanguinity or something like that. Blood, that you do not get married to someone you are related to by blood. In Uganda, we have clans. In Uganda, clans dating back 600 years, and so you're not allowed to wed within your own clan because of this sort of thing, which is a good thing when you consider, when we start talking about early marriages, because they involve family. And the marriages are heterosexual, they are monogamous except for customary and Islamic. And for you to get married, unlike Las Vegas, is it? You have to have spent 15 days in the location in which you're going to get married. So you want to get married in Windi while viewing the gorillas, you'll have to stay with the gorillas for 15 days before you can have your whatevers. Okay. Am I good? Again. Cool. Okay. Now, this is the multiplicity of officials. I think that's what you're talking about. Registering a marriage becomes so complicated. Look at the multiplicity of officials who are responsible for registering. The Registrar General for Kampala, Chief Administrative Officers, those are like the district heads. They wed in their respective districts. Then you have sub-county chiefs, which are now the smaller units like municipalities. They wed within those areas for customary marriages and things like that. And then, of course, you have the religious leaders, all the churches, the Catholic, Anglican, Seventh-day, all the Pentecostals, all of them wed. And then we are supposed to make some sort of sense out of all this maze and actually have a register of all the marriages. So if we are really going to have marriages registered, and we have to use these people, but we have to be coherent. Perhaps what I need to mention that all these people are supposed to file returns with the Register of Marriages at the government. Obviously, they don't often do that, but, well, we were trying our level best, but since in my country, most people have faith in their faith. They believe in the religions much more than in government. Can't say I fault them there, but what that means is that they are likely to ignore that other transition of the data, and so churches will have some data, but you don't have access to it, and therefore you cannot make coherent interventions. Okay, and that. These are some stats just in the last few years, and you can see that we have literally tripled civil marriages in the last 3 years. I think, again, it's the effect of the global market, the global village. People move around and they find that civil marriages are what is done else and in most of the other places, so they come back and do civil marriages. You can see that, what else is interesting here? Customary marriages too are going up. They are in hundreds, and actually all marriages are going up. No, not all marriages are going up. Marriage registration is going up. Marriages have always been up. What is happening is we are beginning to capture the data more and more, and later on I'll give you some of the interventions we've done to achieve this, to do this tripling and everything. Of course, the last bottom line there, you can see that that's the one which makes me most happy. That's the money we collect. It is in billions of Uganda shillings, and it is going up every year. And therefore, they think that I'm a really nice person and I'm doing my work well because of the money. The government only looks at the money. They are not interested in the rest of the statistics. Okay. There. Again, you have these charts which are cute and nice colored, but what they are telling you, you can see, if you look at the first one, total civil registrations for marriages. You can see clearly they're going up, which is a good thing. When you look at the marriage returns from the churches and the customary marriages, you see the slump of the COVID era, and then it goes back up. This is that one, which has a light blue and dark blue. You see that it 8,000, then it goes 7,000, 7,000, then it goes back to 9,000 last financial year. So you can clearly read the COVID, whatever there. Then the bottom left is comparing civil marriages and customary marriages. In my country, truth be told, we don't have yet a survey, but hopefully we'll do something about it. Customary marriages are supposedly the most performed marriages in the country because they are down at clan level, at family level. Civil marriages are just for elites, the ones in the towns and things like that. So what that chart bottom left shows you is that civil marriages are so much more registered, clearly, since they are done by government anyway. So almost all of them are registered. Customary marriages, while they're going up, they are so minuscule. The numbers are so minuscule, and yet they are actually the most. And if I am to sort of extrapolate, if we are to do anything about early child marriages and teenage marriages, we're going to have to look at customary marriages because this is where it happens. Nobody is going to go to a church with a 13-year-old. Nobody is going to go to the government office with a 15-year-old. But the two families are going to exchange cows and the milk guards I showed you earlier, and then they are going to have a marriage. So if we are going to make interventions, they are going to have to be at that level. Okay, you see, when I came in, you said something interesting about this, that people do not find a reason why they should register marriage. So if we're going to up marriage registration, we're going to make interventions which give the people the use of a marriage registration. If you are not using it, a while ago I was still in charge of birth and death, and it was the same thing. People did not find a reason why they would register a birth or death until it was required for you to go to primary school to start school. You needed a birth certificate. Then when the national ID came on board, you needed a birth certificate. So you need to create a use for the marriage certificate. If I'm going to get this marriage certificate and keep it until I drop dead, I'm not going to see the reason. And actually, I asked you, why do you want to register my bedroom affairs? I mean, what is the whole point? Why is government looking into my bedroom? And they have a point. Why is government looking into someone's bedroom? Really, those are private affairs and shouldn't. But you have to create a need. And the reason you saw the elites beginning to register is because for them the need is immediate. If I'm coming to South Africa with my wife, I'm going to have to produce a certificate to prove that she's my wife. If I'm going for insurance, medical insurance, and she's going to go on the card as my spouse, I need to prove to the insurance company that she is my wife, and therefore I need to register the marriage. But if I'm in the village, I'm a subsistence farmer, and I grow my food, I eat it, and go to the well and pick the water, there is absolutely no need for a marriage certificate. There is a need for a marriage certificate. Why? Very briefly, I will digress very briefly, Madam. One of the biggest things we are having in our country today is land theft. That population of 46 million I showed you a little earlier, in that little place where we are, is creating land pressure. And land is, every day there are land wrangles on the news, in the courts and everything. And then we discovered something. Fortunately or unfortunately, ladies tend to outlive their husbands. Mainly because probably we marry younger anyway. So even if you are to live the same age, you would probably die earlier than your spouse. Now, in my country and in many other countries, land is registered in the man's name, right? But it's the lady who remains behind and is administering this estate unofficially, because nobody goes to administrator general for such things. You are in the village, you have your land, everybody knows this is Mrs. So-and-so, the widow and everything. So that land remains with the lady's charge, and she gives it to the children, and it goes on to the next generation. Now, come next generation, there is this lady called a name, but that name is not on the land title. The land title still has the name of her husband, right? But there's no connection between this woman and the husband. The only connection that would have been there would be the marriage certificate. But guess what? The marriage was never registered. So any shrewd person can go and transfer that land from the man into his, and then you have to go to court. And when you get to court, you have to prove that this woman was the wife, and therefore the administrator. And the only document you can use is a marriage certificate, which you don't have. And so, land gone. We've seen so many of those examples. So even if you're a peasant and you have your small little piece of land, and you don't think that you're going to travel anywhere, you'll not need a visa, you're not going to go medical insurance, you have land, you better register your marriage. So they are uses, but they need to be explained to the people. They need to understand them, and then from there they will be able to do the registration. They will find the reason why they should have registration. Now, we found a bit of conflicts within the law and what happens, or rather in the practice of, in the practice, we're beginning, because of such things like land, we're beginning to get a lot of forged documentation. We had in my country a while back, a newspaper did an expose, and so many church marriage certificates had been. We have a street there called Nasa Road, which can probably make a visa for the US as well, which would pass the immigration. They are very good. They really do their stuff very well. So they had produced so many church marriage. And most people go to church, get that big certificate, put it in their homes, and they are comfortable. But without registration, you can't get back to that. You can't be able to do whatever. So we found a lot of forged whatever. Then we found failure to adhere to norms. You see, the law says if you're going to have a Catholic marriage, it must be a Catholic marriage. In other words, it must adhere to the norms and customs of the Catholic Church. If you're going to have a Muslim marriage, you have to have given the mahari and everything. It must adhere to Sharia for us to be able to register it. But people always cut corners. I don't know about in your countries, but people cut corners, mainly because of pressure. People want to travel and they want to have to be married. Actually, people have walked into my office and said, how much do you want for me to give me a marriage certificate? And I'm like, do you want to get married? No, I don't want to get married. I need a marriage certificate. That's all I want. So yeah, there is a lot of forgery. And then, of course, we have contradictions within the eligibility criteria. The Sharia for the Muslims says 13, 14. Even the Christian, because in some countries, I think the US is 16, majority age, you can allow to be wed 16, while for us it's 18. So there is a bit of a contradiction. Then there are contradictions again in conversion. In my country, in our laws, we are able to convert customary marriage to a monogamous civil marriage, as long as the spouse is still one. You see, customary is polygamous. You can wed so many. But if you have only done one customary marriage, you are able to convert it into a monogamous civil marriage, right? But then, even in the church, you can go to church with that one lady and wed her in church for the monogamous one. But what happens is someone has got 3 or 4, and they want to take the favorite to church, which is a contradiction. Thank you. That's a contradiction, and we have to resolve it. It's something we need to look at. Okay, these are the strategies we've used so far, which are responsible for the numbers. We've gone out deliberately to reach out to the organizations which actually have more, in which people have faith. Yeah? The traditional institutions, we have kingdoms in my country, Buganda, Bunyoro. We've reached out to them, and that's where we started. We have encouraged them and designed for them a certificate. In my country and in my tradition, most of the history and most of the things is oral, and that happens a lot in Africa. So people would get married, the clans agree, and there is nothing written down. But they have actually had a very proper marriage in that respect. But there's nothing written down. So we encourage them to start issuing certificates of customary marriage. You do this thing, you do the customs and the norms, issue. And we have reached out to other organizations, to the churches, and showed them the importance of why they should register. And slowly they are coming on board. We've integrated our data with the other organization, National ID, Immigration, so that you can create use. We have reached out to the bankers so that if you're going to mortgage your marital home, you need to produce a certificate to drive up use of the marriage certificate. Then Of course, we are doing legal reform. We have increased licensing the churches so that at least the majority of churches are licensed. But we have also gone to deliberately target